Hey, welcome back to Myth Mental Health. I'm Justin A.Williams, the author of Reborn, or Reborn's Virtue Constellation. There's two editions on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles now. And this is Myth Mental Health. And today what we are going to talk about is the divine feminine in myth and stories, and also in our lives, right? The divine feminine is probably characterized a little bit differently today than it probably would have been understood in its original conception in the ancient times. The divine feminine now, I think, is conflated with a lot of things like, if you watch Agatha all along with like witchcraft, Wicca, the earth, and stuff like that. But it was a lot more diverse than that in the ancient world. The most popular, probably divine goddess now, divine feminine, at least in the Western world, I would say is probably Hecate. Hecate being the ancient Mediterranean, and I say Mediterranean, I know she's a Greek goddess by canon, but a lot of Greek gods actually don't start off in Greece. There's theories that Ares starts off in Turkey. They found evidence of worship there. That Athena might have started off being based off of Isis or Neat in Egypt. So, and a lot of cultures besides Greece worship Greek gods. We find the worship of Greek gods in as far as down as close to Kenya, with the Nubians and Ethiopians, worshiping them. A lot of Greek gods were worshipped in the Middle East, Spain, and this is before colonization by the Romans. So, the divine feminine back then was very, very diverse in terms of you'd have like a character like Persephone, who doesn't traditionally have anything to do with magic. She does have something to do with the earth, flowers, springtime. But that's kind of her role once she's understood to be the wife of Hades. Her initial role is the maiden, the young girl, the spirit of the young female, and in the Greek sense was innocent, bursting with life. A treacherous dynamic, though, because whenever there's an innocence in Greek mythology, there's going to be something to come and challenge it. Take a look at the story of Eurydice. Eurydice would be a perfect Persephone archetype. Eurydice is a beautiful young nymph who is at a party, being young, carefree, innocent, and then she gets chased by a satyr. A satyr being the mark of, I guess, the challenge in that story. And then she's bit by a snake and dies. Has to confront death, and then of course she's no longer a maiden anymore because she's gone through experience. Right, so the Greeks and a lot of ancient cultures, when they look at the divine feminine, they look at the theory that you were only you're in a certain stage, and each stage of life might speak to a different divine feminine. Right, if you're an older woman, you might see yourself more like Demeter, motherly, caring, powerful, roosterish. Right, roosters always minding their children. And connected with the earth, that's true, but more like in like seasons, not really like the earth like Gaia is another divine feminine, and I think she's popular now too, especially in a lot of like Wicca and witchcraft kind of things. Gaia is literally the earth, though, in Greek mythology, and she is not to be troubled with. But she's not magic, and I think a lot of times now with the divine feminine, we find that we are conflating all these types of archetypes of goddesses with magic and witchcraft. And I think that is interesting. It's an interesting move. I think it's because a lot of people who are in the neo-pagan cults, I don't want to say cult, I'm sorry, but neo-pagan communities are trying to do something that maybe can't be done, which is to recapture the past in totality. Unfortunately, once Christianity took over Rome, by the time of Constantine, many things that were in the past that were of the polytheistic religions of the Middle East, North Africa, or really actually anywhere. I mean, this was a tactic done by and I don't mean to offend anybody, but this is history, by Christians and the Catholic Church to erase as much of paganism as they could, right? They went to the Maya and tried to erase them and took their books and codexes, went to the Aztecs, went to the Americas, they went to the Africa, they went to all over the world. But this is something that starts in Rome. And in Rome, they were smashing what they called idols. You know, in Christianity, you have no idols, which are statues, same as Judaism, Islam. And these Abrahamic faiths inspired people to not feel something I was talking to about in my live today, which is nostalgia for the past, right? What they call in Arabic the Jahiliyyah, the stage where they were in false worship, right? Before the revelation of the true God, they say. So the divine feminine gets lost because we don't exactly have the scriptures from the Eleusinian mysteries, right? The Eleusinian mysteries are one of the biggest religious sects in the ancient world. You had to be initiated. It was led by priestesses, right? That's another thing too. Rome shifts from the Vestal Virgins and being led by priestesses and females having power, but in different roles, right? You had the role of the female, the homestead, which would be Hestia, or oh wow, what is her Roman name? Anyway, Vesta, and she would be that power of that domain. Again, she had no magic, right? And what they're trying to do now is conflate these characters together, even gods, male gods together, into a story and narrative that they can say this is scripture, right? Pagan scripture. Unfortunately, we don't know the scriptures of the Celts and the ancient Greeks. And even though the ancient Greeks were a literary culture, they wrote everything down. It makes sense that there probably was scripture. There probably was scripture in terms of how to worship Apollo, worship Zeus, worship. I mean, we have hymns of Hesiod and Homer, works and days and stuff like that. But quite honestly, that's pretty much it. It's pretty paltry. And a lot of people have to speculate. And speculation can be a tool to get you to galvanize a community together. I think it's interesting how, especially in Europe now, the pagan community is growing. I think it's growing with the sense of nationalism too, and indigenousness too. And I see that here in America, that indigenousness is leading people back to pre-Christian, pre-Abrahamic religious cultures, pre-colonial religious belief. And I think it's interesting because these communities are growing and they're getting big, and they are filled with encapsulating and preserving a past that I think is just as much a part of us as any other thing that we deal with. Maybe even more, because it's speaking to a moment that doesn't really exist anymore. When I was a kid, I was nostalgic too for this past, because my dad was into paganism as a study, and I think he told me before he died that he loved Odin more than any god or religion there was, because Odin understood humans and Odin understood the real path. And I'm not going to go too much into Odin. I'll do that for another video, and my dad's Odinism that he told me, that he kept secret for the most part, because he was raised Christian. He was also Jewish, Scandinavian Jewish, which was interesting to me. But he was looking for a way to connect with his past. His mother he never knew, really. She left him when he was 4. This is before Love and Interest Virginia in 1967, so he was an illegal baby because he was part of an interracial marriage. Anyway, I'm digressing. What I'm trying to say is that we are trying to search for the past constantly. And sometimes it doesn't matter how accurate we are. It doesn't matter that we are necessarily going and conflating Hecate with Persephone, with Gaia, with Demeter, and then maybe some Mayan goddesses, or then you have Bridget and the Morrigan and all these goddesses that are coming together to create magic and spells and things like that. And I just think, while I admire a lot about the neo-pagan movement, it's just, you just shouldn't be doing it. You can't do that with all these things, because you lose the speciality and the diversity of the realms that is the divine feminine, right? The divine feminine was if it exists, encapsulates all the realms and possibilities of not just women but people. And because there's no way as a human, as a male, that I'm not going to interact with females. As a straight male, I want to love and be loved by a straight female, right? I want to be with someone who wants to be with me romantically, right? As a male that has siblings that are sisters, I want to be a good brother to them, and I gotta understand them. I gotta understand their plight. How can I do that if I don't have the full realm of understanding of a woman as, let's say, someone who takes care of the home, raises children, becomes a grandmother, right? Then is a single woman, is a maiden, right? Is of the earth, but is also of the sky. Is of it can be like the storm in your life, right? Or it can be the peace in your life, right? Just like in many ways, men mirror that in their own way, and the divine masculine is something we could talk about on this podcast. But divine masculine, I think, is less conflated today because Christianity and Islam and Judaism encapsulate that so well in Scripture. What the ancients thought of the divine masculine, right? The warrior, then which is Yahweh. Yahweh is kind of like the warrior god. If you like angels, Michael, the avenging angel. The male as the hero, right? And then you also have the male as the father, the pater familia. You have the male in so many different aspects that are encapsulated so clearly. And that's why I think so many people who do go into myth and study myth are males. Because what we have, the evidence that we have, speaks to them in a different way. And that's why I in no way condemn the neo-pagan movement, because I understand the appeal of trying to at least venerate the divine feminine in some way. I have a friend who has divine feminine on her arm and tattooed, and I asked her one day, I said, where'd you get that from? Like, who is your goddess, right? And she was basically like, no, it's from a Mac Miller song. But I thought that was interesting about, Mac Miller's a man, and he's the one preserving this and influencing and spreading the word about the divine feminine. You get that a lot these days, where it's really upon males to educate the world about the feminine, because most time mythicists and writers of scripture were males, but also people who go into myth and study, a lot of them are males, and probably most of them are males. So you don't want males to think that the only importance of Gaia, or the only relevance of, let's say, Izanami, I believe is the Japanese, or Amaterasu, right? This Japanese sun goddess. You don't want females to feel like they're being talked at, as I say, mansplained, and you don't want females to feel as though they have to resort to conflating all these different females just to prove a point, or to have some kind of representation. I can relate this to people of color in America, right? How long in the 18th century, 17th and the 19th century, most African history was written by non-Africans, and they were males, and they got a lot of shit wrong. And this is not to hate on males at all. They didn't get it wrong because they were male. They got it wrong because they didn't know what they were talking about, and because they had an agenda, for the most part. Everybody that was studying Egypt, for the most part, except for E.A. Wallace Budge, was studying from the lens of how can these dark-skinned, maybe black, we would call them black people, or African people, build the pyramids. How could they build Mali, the great Malian empire? How could the richest man of all time be an African when, at the time, we're just coming out of slavery, or we're in the slavery mode, right? You walk out your door and the only Africans if you were a white man in America in the South, is a slave. And then you maybe take a trip to Egypt, or you take a trip to ancient Mali, and you see these, the Great Wall of Benin, which was able to be seen from space. and you see, the pyramids, and you see, remember, most pyramids actually are in the Sudan. They're not as big, they're small, but they're there. Or you meet the Dogon tribe, and you're interacting with the Dogon tribe, and you notice that they are right about the binariness of a star system around Sirius. I think Sirius B. Incredible. How do they know that, right? People say it's aliens and all that bullshit. They were smart people. Just because you don't know how they deduced it doesn't mean they didn't deduce it. Just because they don't have writing in the way that you look at doesn't mean that maybe they did have some writing and it's no longer with us. Maybe they destroyed it upon seeing the colonialism that was about to happen, right? There's a great story of a woman who's living, I think, in Mauritania, or what is now Libya, and she saw the onslaught of the Arabic invasion post the Islamic conquest, right, or during the Islamic conquest of North Africa. And she tells people, look, they're coming, and they may be violent, destroy everything. So she probably had them destroy their scriptures too. Evidence of that anything that would be powerful. Because remember, in the ancient sense, I know I'm going on a little tangent here, but the ancient sense, scripture is not just things that you were writing. This is power. Just like people say the Bible is written by God. Ancient people believe that about their gods. The codices of the Maya, they believe that their codices were divine. And this is the most precious stuff. In ancient Rome, the words of the Sibyl, the Kumaya Sibyl, or the Sibyls were the prophetesses. They would connect with Apollo, and they would give prophecies. And they thought that those prophecies were so accurate, were so powerful, that they hid them away, and you could not find them. We barely have evidence of a lot of them now because it was so precious to the Romans. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that people in cultures where we say they had no writing maybe did have writing, and maybe it's a cover-up. Or maybe they didn't have writing and they communicated in a way that was, it wasn't necessary. All they had to do was remember it and preach it down orally. In any sense, we do lose things over time, and we have lost the true sense of the divine feminine in all its variety, all its versatility, and we can try to recapture that. We can, if we can, try to do what they say, listen to spirit and all that stuff, meditate on it, all that. But really, if you want to understand the divine feminine, just interact with a woman who I guess identifies as female, or exudes femininity in any sense, whether that's from a happy perspective or a rageful perspective, or a perspective where they are someone that you admire, or maybe someone that you don't like. Right? You can see all the twists and turns of the divine feminine in actual women, because that's where we get the stories from. Persephone doesn't exist, Gaia doesn't exist, Hecate doesn't exist without human women existing as well. You need the human component to truly understand the purpose of the divine feminine. So that's my talk for today. Thank you for listening to Myth Mental Health. Remember, like, share, and subscribe. Also, my book is Reborn. Not Reborn. Well, my book is called Reborn. I'm Justin A.Williams. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. You can cop it wherever you like. Check out my podcast, The Trend with Justin A.Williams. And thank you for tuning in.